now. There you go. And this is pretty much everyone, and it is 7:30, so I suggest we start. So welcome everyone. I decided to set up our green homes as a way for people that are either undertaking green home makeovers or thinking about it to learn from each other, to learn from their peers. And so rather than listen to me rabbit on all the time, which some of you enjoy doing and some of you don't, but you would learn from each other. And so tonight we're very lucky to have John Hill Daniel, who is somebody that has done quite a bit of work on his home, which you'll hear about in a moment. And I think you're going to find that really interesting. And then there'll be an opportunity for questions and discussion, and you can put your questions to John or to me. Now, we were hoping to have Steph Vidal Hall as a facilitator tonight, but Steph is unable to join us for family reasons, unfortunately. But we did pre-record a conversation between Steph and John Hill Daniel. So although Steph is not here in person, she is here, and so I'm gonna play you that recording in a minute of Steph in conversation with John, because Steph is obviously really good at facilitating conversations because that's her job. And John he has given a really good presentation in that recording, and he's also added some pictures to it. One of the good things, John is an artist. He lives in South Birmingham. He's an artist, and one of the things about having an artist is he can do him. He's done incredible things in inserting photos, brilliant photos that you're about to see, by the way. And John has included those photos in the video recording that you're about to see, and he did it in seconds. It would have taken me days to do that. So John, he's not only a keen retrofitter, but he's a man of many talents. So everybody wave to John. And what I'm going to do now is I am going to play the recording of John in conversation with Steph, and then John will take questions live. So
pressed it, but I can't advance.
I need to unmute Steph. Please let this work. It worked. I swear to you all that this worked 5 minutes ago.
I think we live in a 1930s.
Sorry, I've done it. Right. Okay. So here we go again.
Good stuff. So welcome everybody, and I'm in conversation today with John Hill Daniel, and we're going to be talking about how he has brought some green measures to his home. To kick us off, John, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and the house you live in?
My name's John Hill Daniel. I'm a video editor, singer-songwriter and photographer. My household is myself, my wife, and our 3 sons. And we live in a 1930s solid brick wall terrace in Birmingham.
Lovely, and we're almost neighbours, aren't we? We both live in South Birmingham, and we've got fairly similar houses. I also live in a just before the 30s, a 1926 brick-built house as well. One of my interests in talking to you, John, is that I've done a few things to change my house, but I'm really looking forward to hearing about what you've done to change yours. Could I ask you, what started you off on your journey to a greener home?
Well, when I was about 8 years old, I read a book called House Plans, as an American book for self-builders. The last one in the book was called The House of the Future. And I was really intrigued by that house. And for a long time, when I imagined my adult life, I would be living in this house. they didn't seem to be available for sale at the time when I was looking to buy a house. And so I'm in the house that I'm in at the moment. But I then visited one day the Centre for Alternative Technology in Machynlleth in Wales. And I was really, really interested and intrigued by all of their low carbon building ideas that they have there, and particularly straw bale building. I love the idea of being able to build with a completely natural material and make houses that were super insulated and super quiet and also really beautiful. But when I came home to look at how that might apply to my house, the plot didn't really allow putting in a wall that was 600 millimeters wide. So I had to admit that I couldn't really build a straw bale house or a straw bale extension where I lived. But then I went to see the zero carbon house much closer to home in Balsall Heath that John Christopher's built in 2009. And that was a conversion of a standard 2 up, 2 down Victorian brick terrace house into a super eco home, a house that actually generates more energy than it uses. And at the time, we were wanting to add an extra bedroom onto our house. And so I started thinking, well, what can we use some of these ideas to perhaps to build some of these things into our extension when we start building?
Fantastic. It's just really funny there. We both got inspired as children by books. I remember I was very inspired by, I think it's John Somerville's book on being self-sufficient. And also I've seen John's house in Balsall Heath. Do I understand he's still got open days, John, so that you can actually go and visit it now and see how it's turned out?
Well, I went to an open day there pre-COVID. So I think that was about a year and a half or so ago. So I think they used to do them regularly twice a year, and they're a lot less frequent now, but they still might come up. So it's worth following Zero Carbon House on Twitter to find out if they are doing an open day.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. So you were in the position of knowing you wanted to extend, put on an extra room, and you wanted to make some changes. I know you've done a lot of work on different things, but there are two things I'm particularly interested in, and that's your heating controls and your mechanical heat recovery system. Can we start to talk about that, and you tell me about the key changes that you've made?
Yes, certainly. So the heat controls we put in 2014. At the same time, we were having external wall insulation applied, so the house was insulated, and it became suddenly much more possible to heat it. But the heat controls were partly inspired by the fact that I was working at home a lot, and I'd find myself kind of running the heating during the winter and practically heating the whole house when all I really needed to do was to heat the room I was in. I had one solution to that, which was to turn the heating off and just go down and dance in the living room every 2 hours. For about 5 minutes, and that to generate some heat just within myself. But we got some heat controls, and I think originally I'd researched this on Which, so I'd been to the Which website and looked at what heat controls that they recommended. And the Heat Genius was a local company, so I liked that. And I found out someone from King's Heath Transition, so someone I'd talked to about low carbon in the past, was actually working there. So there seemed to be all sorts of good reasons to use them. And with them, you specify your system. So you go through how many rooms that you have, what kind of controls that you want in each room, and order your system online. And then they will then send around a plumber who will install it all for you. And there's a lot of flexibility in what you install. So you could just have the hub that controls your boiler with a central thermostat, or you can go completely all singing, all dancing, and have controlled valves in every room. So you have individual control of every radiator and controlled heat sensors in every room. So the system knows how warm every room is, and also whether a room is being used or not. So it can actually learn the way that you use your house. And we went for everything possible. We ordered everything that was possible to get. So our system cost £1,000 and that's a 3-bedroomed house sort of controlling with 2 receptions and a kitchen, so separate controls for every room. And I think we ended up then paying the plumber an extra 300 for other jobs that needed to be done. Like we had some very old radiator valves that weren't compatible with the new controllers. So we had some of those changed. So the whole job in the end ended up costing 1,300.
Wow. And if you'd gone at the cheaper end, John, what's the least you could have spent, but still had, you know, some of that flexibility?
At the time, the cheapest option would have been about 300, 350 pounds, I think. I had a look, and actually the hub part of it seems to be cheaper these days, so it might even be less than that now.
Cool. That sounds really great. So you've talked a little bit about who installed it for you. Was it Genius Hub?
Yes, it's called Genius Hub. It had it was called Heat Genius at the time, but it's called Genius Hub now.
Brilliant. So how did the installation go, John?
The installation was pretty straightforward. I think it happened in a day. So all the electronic parts of the system are all configured before they come out to the house. So there's no setup to do on the electronic side, because it's all been done when you specified your system online.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very straightforward. The plumber just in each room either fitting a thermostat, a digital thermostat to our existing valve, or where the valve was too old to do that, to taking out the old valve and putting in a new one that the controller could be attached to. Then the room sensors are all just attached to the wall with a sticky pad, so there's nothing really to do there. The only thing that's actually wired in is the hub, which has to be connected to your internet connection, mm-hmm. and the boiler controller, which is wired in as part of the power to your central heating boiler.
Fantastic. So was there any damage to your decorations or anything like that?
No, I don't think there was any damage at all. And also, we recently had to resite the hub and put it somewhere else. So we had to move things around ourselves. And we also managed not to damage anything then.
Fantastic. That's brilliant. I still just love the idea of you dancing every 2 hours. I think that's something that I should choose for myself. But yeah. What difference has it made for you?
Well, it had the immediate effect that I wanted, in that I could, when I was at home on my own, I could just heat the room that I was in, and the boiler would do an awful lot less work then, just to keep my one room warm rather than the whole house. It has the effect that the heating is largely self-managing, so we don't really have a kind of point in winter where we think now it's time to turn the heating on, and a point in summer where we think now it's time to turn it off. The heating just looks after itself. It knows how warm we would like each room to be at each time of day, and it looks after that without us having to do anything. We use the footstep feature for some rooms, which means that it learns how the room is used and heats it for the times when it thinks people are going to be in there. The only place we found that this didn't work was in our boys' bedrooms, because when they get up for school, they get up and they're out of the room so fast that the system hasn't really noticed that they were there. So we found that for the bedrooms, we had to actually put a timer on those they'd be warm for when the boys got up. But other than that, the learning mode worked well for us.
So now you are in your study working at home, like so many of us are, only dancing for pleasure now rather than for body heat. What difference has it made to your bills, John?
Well, we had this done at the same time as our external wall insulation, which would have had a big impact on the amount of gas that we were using. But we had a 40% reduction in the amount of gas we were using over the year.
Wow.
And we also went from being in a house that was cold most of the time to a house that was always comfortable.
Wow, that sounds amazing.
The controls on their own wouldn't have achieved that. If the controls on their own would have made the house more comfortable, but and they might have reduced our usage of gas. But because we had those two measures done at the same time, it's hard to know how much belongs to one measure and how much to the other.
So John, that sounds, I'm deeply envious. Sounds like you've got a lovely warm study, and also you're saving the planet and saving your bills. Were there any downsides or problems?
The only downside I've noticed is that there are a lot of batteries to change. So the radiator valves all have two batteries which need to be changed once a year, and the room sensor each have a battery that needs to be changed about once a year. So you need to keep in a good stock of batteries, but the system does tell you when a battery is getting low and needs replacing.
Fantastic. And you did tell me something about needing to move your smart hub at one point. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, we changed our internet provider. So we moved our hub from one side of the house to the other. And that had the effect that it disrupted the wireless communications of the hub. So suddenly the hub couldn't communicate with any of the devices, including the central heating boiler. So it couldn't turn the central heating on and off. So that was quite alarming. We solved that problem experimentally by moving the smart plugs around. So the system has a number of plugs which you can plug into your main sockets, which act as switch sockets that are controlled by the hub.
Yeah.
So you can use them, for example, to turn a light on and off, but they also act as signal boosters for all the other devices. So when we had got one in the critical position, we found that all the devices were then able to communicate through that plug. So the system all came back online again.
Fantastic. And were Genius Hub helpful in that process?
Genius Hub support were really helpful. I sent in a message to them when we were having this problem, and they got back to me with some advice, and they also restarted the hub remotely as well. So yeah, they were supportive during that.
Fantastic, good to know. Is it okay if we move on to your mechanical ventilation with heat recovery? Can you talk to me about what made you choose that, and of course the particular system that you chose as well?
Yeah, could you just repeat that last part of that question?
I can, and also could you kick off by telling us what mechanical ventilation with heat recovery is, why you chose it, and what particular system? Thanks, John.
Okay. So mechanical ventilation with heat recovery is a system which is basically bringing in fresh air into your house while taking away stale air, and doing the additional job of transferring heat between the two. So as your stale air is removed from the house, its heat is used to heat up the fresh air that's coming in. The reason that you have mechanical ventilation with heat recovery is to basically solve the problems of a really well house. Because if you have a house that's cold and drafty, it's really well ventilated. You've got no problem with ventilation if you've got drafts coming through all your windows, doors, and floorboards. But as you insulate your house and seal it to improve the insulation, because once you've installed your walls, actually sealing the insulation so no air can pass through it makes that insulation even better. But you then start to get a problem with your air quality inside the house. Your air can become stale. You can have problems with mold because the air's not circulating. So that's the reason for putting this system in, is that in our extension, all of the walls of our extension are going to be at a very high level of insulation and air tightness. So we know that we'll need ventilation in the extension to prevent those sorts of problems there, particularly as there's going to be a bathroom and a kitchen in the extension, which produce lots of damp air. But we're also extending the system to cover the rest of the house, because we want to be able to, as we go forward, to improve the insulation and the air tightness in the rest of the house. So we want that ventilation to be there, ready for when we do.
Fantastic. And that sounds familiar to me. I don't have additional modern wall insulation. I've got some aging 1970s double glazing, but I know that in my house, I had a terrible problem with black mold, with the whole house feeling damp, with wallpaper coming loose, with my daughter complaining that when she lay down on her pillow, it felt damp. And I actually had a Damp Pro air pump put in my attic, which was really effective for me. What kind of problems with air quality did you have, John?
So we don't have problems with air quality at the moment. We do have some problems with damp. There are a couple of areas in the house where there is damp developing, and obviously the ventilation will help with that. The other thing, but I think that it's also going to help with, is the tendency that when it's wintertime and you have all the windows shut, and we've really noticed since having higher performance windows and external wall insulation, we've noticed that our house has become more stuffy if all the windows are shut. So that at night, you really need to keep a window slightly open, which gets more and more difficult to do as it gets colder. So I'm looking forward to the ventilation as solving that problem.
Fantastic. And I know that for myself, I always tend to get coughs and things like that. But I know for myself that since I've had my damp pro in the attic, I used to get really problematic coughs that would keep me up all night and disturb my family. But actually, since we've had the air being circulated, that hasn't happened. So for me, it's had a real health impact as well. So I hope that's the same for you. Can you tell us briefly about the system you chose on this and why?
Well, a lot of my research about this extension has been come from looking at the Zero Carbon House. They've put online all of their suppliers and systems that they use, and they had a number of measures supplied by the Green Building Store. So I thought, rather than reinvent the wheel, I'll just go to the Green Building Store and ask what system they think I ought to have. And so what they do is you tell them your situation, you give them your house plans or whatever you want to show them, and tell them what you want to do, and they will then design a system that fits to that, to your house.
Oh, that's a great idea, John. I've got to say, we sourced our low water green toilet from them, and 10 years on, when I needed a spare part for it, they've been incredibly supportive. So it's great to hear they've been really good for you as well. What system did you choose?
Was that question, which system did we choose?
Yeah, for the mechanical ventilation with heat recovery.
The system that we have used is called Zendair, I think, but that was recommended to us by the Green Building Store. And at the moment, we're at the position where our extension building work is just about to start. And we've already got, with Green Building Store, that we've got the design of how the ducting is going to fit into the new extension and how it's going to be ducted to the existing house. And we're just at the point now where we're saying, looking at the lead time on these orders, this is probably about the sort of time that we need to be thinking about ordering that unit in, because I think there's a 3-month wait for deliveries at the moment.
Okay, and who's going to install it for you this time, and what kind of disruption period are they predicting?
Sorry, Steph, I just stopped my video again because I can't hear your question coming through. So
no worries,
could you
John.
try that again?
So who is going to install it for you, and what kind of period of disruption are they telling you to expect?
So because I ought to say, I suppose, that in putting in one of these ventilation systems into an existing house, and particularly into a small house, is quite a challenge. So if you imagine, you have to get a duct to every room in the house. So if you didn't mind having the ducts visible, so if you wanted your house to kind of have that airport sort of look where all the ducts are hanging from the ceiling, then that would be a way that you could put the system into any house. But if you want the ducts to be hidden away, that can be quite difficult, and it could cause a significant amount of disruption. What I've done with Green Building Store is to try and look at the system where all the difficult ducting is done in the extension, so that the ducting that's in the main house is as simple and straightforward as possible.
Brilliant.
But a lot of this is something where it's worth getting expert advice, because you really need someone who knows how to lay one of these systems out, to look at your house and saying, is it feasible? How much trouble is it going to be? Yeah.
And who's going to install it for you, John?
Well, we've got a builder who is doing our extension project for us. He's a builder, but he's also a carpenter, and was an engineer in a previous life. So he's got a really good set of skills and is a great problem solver. So I know him, and I've worked on projects with him before, and I know he is as he says, we know we're going to come across really difficult problems, but we know that we'll be able to find a solution one way or another. And I'm going to have to refer to him as the masked builder, because he doesn't want me to reveal his name and details, because he's very busy at the moment, and he's just about to become even busier building my extension.
I'm really sad about that, John. Sometime in the future, I'm going to ask you to reveal just to me the name of the masked builder. But I love the idea of him coming in like Zorro to your house and giving you a heating duct.
Well, I think when he's completed the job, he will unmask himself. I don't know, but
fantastic.
For now.
Fantastic. Phil, we'll have to build that into our schedule. So I know this one hasn't happened yet, John, but what difference are you hoping it's going to make for you?
Well, going back to what I said at the opening, it allows us to achieve a really high level of insulation in the extension, so that whereas our house is getting bigger in the extension, the amount of energy our house uses is going to go down.
Yeah.
So that I'm really excited about that. As I said, the idea of being able to sleep in winter, to be able to keep the room warm whilst having it properly ventilated, I'm really looking forward to that. And I'm also really sort of advocating this to my sister, who wants to do a self-build, and her children both suffer from asthma. So I'm saying you really need to build one of these into your house, because if you've got asthma, this is going to give you fabulous air quality inside your house and easy breathing.
Brilliant. So for anybody who lives in a single skin brick built house, or who has any health problems to do with their lungs, then this and also anybody who just wants to be greener and save the planet, these are all good things to do.
Absolutely, yeah.
Fantastic. What would you say to a friend or neighbour who wants to have a greener home, John?
Well, I'd encourage them, and I've been in this situation because I have had a neighbour come round asking about my external wall insulation and whether they should have a greener home, and I'd encourage it, because I think whenever we change our lives to be greener, we're changing them to be happier. Generally speaking, whenever you look at things that you do to make your life greener, you're actually improving the quality of your life. So it's usually a good direction to go in. The other thing I would say is to get advice, because there are lots of different measures that you could apply to your house. As we've seen some of them, you could put in a simple heat controller for a couple of £100 possibly. Or you could have external wall insulation, which, depending on your house, might cost you £15,000, £20,000. Right. So there's a huge range of costs to these measures. So if you've got a limited budget to spend, then you want to make sure you're spending it on the measures that are going to give you the most benefit. So I'd say talk to someone, get advice about your particular situation. What's your house like? How do you use it? What are the measures that are going to really make the difference for you?
Fantastic. John Hill Daniel, thank you so much for sharing your experience with me. It's been really, really interesting and inspiring. Thank you to Phil Beardmore, who set up this interview, and hope to see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, John, and also Steph. Now, hopefully you're all familiar with the raise hand facility in Zoom. So if you click on reactions towards the bottom of your screen, then you'll see raise hand, and then I can see who's got their hand up, and I can ask you. So I can invite you. So who's got a question for John? I can see, John, you've already answered one from Aldo in the chat.
Oh yes, Aldo had asked what was the Damp Pro system that Steph was using. And yeah, it's a positive pressure system. So it's a single fan blowing air into the house that, that ventilates by putting pressure in the house, which means that the air will leak out wherever it can and keep the air inside the house fresh. So that's a lot more straightforward than a mechanical ventilation with heat recovery system. But it does mean that you're always losing heat out of the house while it's running.
It says Ben, yeah, it says you've changed your name. Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, John. So your wall insulation, so you've gone external rather than internal. Did you consider doing it internally? And why did you choose external?
I think well, when the measure was done, we did it as part of the Green Deal scheme, and we were a pilot on the Green Deal scheme. So I think what happened then was we had an EPC, and someone looked at the house and said, external wall insulation is what you want for this property. In retrospect, I think it's a really good idea, because what it means is that your solid brick wall, which has previously been a liability in letting all the heat out of your house, suddenly becomes a massive heat battery. It gives you a huge thermal mass inside the insulation of the house, which means that that really stabilizes temperatures. And also, there's the other things, of course, is that it's not taking any space from the inside of the house. It's not it doesn't cause any disruption on the inside of the house when you have the installation done.
And I think it's also worth adding, Ben, that I mean, John, your house was probably built in the 1930s.
That's right.
And he's a different archetype to yours, Ben, and you know, a pre-First World War home, and so external wall insulation is a fairly low risk measure on a house like John's. On a pre-1919 house, it's always more complicated to insulate, and so one of the problems with some of the government funded schemes is that they're very much one size fits all, and somebody decides a particular technology is the way to go, and they go out and install as many of that particular technology as possible. That has particularly happened with EWI, and in some cases that's led to skimping on quality. When you're doing your own retrofit, then you've got more choice over it and you've got the opportunity to get it right. What I will say is that from what I've seen of your EWI, John, certainly from those photos, it looked as if they've done it properly.
Yeah,
because the Green Deal scheme has acquired a bad reputation because of some quite notoriously badly delivered EWI in schemes in Preston, Liverpool, Teesside. But in the case of John's home, they've done it absolutely right by the looks of it. Nicola.
Hello. I live in a very old house, probably around 1700, and I've been working with Phil on some solutions. I'm interested to know whether you looked at solar at all.
Yes. Yeah, we're planning to have solar PV on the extension, and it's something that I've always kind of wanted to do, but the amount of south-facing roof we had was so small that it was not worth doing. But with the extension, that's going to become that much bigger that it's going to give us a space that's worth putting some panels on. I was considering whether to have some solar thermal panels as well as solar PV. And actually, I went to Phil for advice about that, and he said to go full PV with all of the space because we're having a heat pump installed as well. So solar PV, a battery, and a heat pump is definitely part of the plan.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Because if not, I've got a question to John. I was very impressed. I'm very impressed with your photos, John. They're some of the best photos of external wall insulation that I've seen. And what I noticed about them is the way they've dealt with thermal bridging. Is that? Do you know how that came about? Were you aware at the time of the design decisions they were making to prevent thermal bridging?
Yeah, I was very interested in what they were doing. I think the pictures that you're talking about are the ones that show where they're fitting pipe work on the outside of the house and the outside tap and that kind of thing. So any place that they had something fitted to the wall, they'd fit a wooden batten to the wall that was in line with the insulation, so that after they'd rendered over the top, it all looked the same. It all looked rendered, but behind each bit where you were going to place a bracket for a pipe or a tap, that would be fitted into the wooden block. Now, the wooden block, obviously, it doesn't give you as much insulation as the polyurethane foam that you have on the outside of the house, but it does mean that there's something insulating in between the brick wall and the items on the outside that you're fixing to it.
Yeah. Maggie and Dave, you're on mute.
So we are. Thank you. Yeah, we were interested to find out whether you had a list of suppliers or who was going to supply John's air source heat pump, because we've just been investigating that at the moment, and it's quite.
Oh, I want to know who's going to supply my air source heat pump as well.
Yeah, there's suppliers on the MSC website, but many of them actually seem to be wanting to do any work at the moment, or they're too busy to
well,
get
there's a couple that RHI, so Renewable Heating Installations, who I've kind of talked to every 6 months for the last few years, because they seem like a really good and responsible company. I'd heard a lot of good things about them, saying, "Are you doing any installations yet?" And no, we're too busy. But every kind of 6 months, I get back to them, and I've just done that, and they've said, "No, we still can't help you." But yeah, I do have I've got a couple that I'm looking at the moment, and I'm trying to remember what those companies are. Oh, New Heat. So New Heat have who is NU Heat. I've been talking to them for quite a while, and when our project has got delayed for lots of other reasons, and they kind of kept chasing me saying, "Is this project happening yet? Is it happening yet?" So they've probably been the most proactive installer. But no, I still don't know who's going to do the installation. Yeah, and I'm also interested in any recommendations or experience that anyone else has on that.
RHI I've done some maintenance work on the heat pump at Eco Birmingham in the past, but you're right, they're quite difficult to get hold of. And to be honest, the problem with heat pumps is that the way you get the accreditation for the renewable heat incentive, the level of paperwork that you have to do on the renewable heat incentive is such that it discourages people from getting accredited. So the number of installers of heat pumps has gone down over the years, just at a time when we need more of them. And because of the Green Homes Grant, which is now finished, and also the local authority equivalent of the Green Homes Grant, then yeah, they are all pretty busy. So if you're thinking of getting a heat pump this winter, then you need to start looking now. The other company that I would mention is MSC Heating, who are based in Birmingham. They've done.
Oh yeah, I sent them an email today. So
okay, again, I'll put them in the chat. But again, they are very busy, but they are good. They did a job for a client of mine, and they were very thorough, well-designed system, knew what they were talking about, and most importantly, the people said that there's a blog about it on my website, but basically the people that live in that house say that it's much warmer since they had a heat pump, and it looks as if it's cheaper to run as well.
Well, that's great. And the other thing that attracted me to them was because they also do solar PV installation as well. Sorry, a solar PV installation.
Yeah. Good. Any other questions?
Phil, I've got a question if I can.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can't find the raise hand symbol.
Don't mind. Carry on.
In fact, there's two questions if there's time. One is with heat pumps, ground source or air source, you know, what's the pros and cons? That's my first question. And the other one is batteries for electricity that you generate. What are they like these days and what can they do?
Shall I answer that?
Well, I can tell you from our particular situation, the amount of garden that we've got means that even if we use all of our garden space for ground source, we couldn't practically achieve that. So we're using air source. But you can say much more about that, Phil.
Yeah, I mean, as a general rule, ground source heat pumps are far more efficient than air source heat pumps, and that's because the ground is a better heat store than the air. But most homes aren't suitable for ground source heat pumps for the reasons that John says, because you need an area. So if your house has a floor area of 100 square meters, then you need a garden of 300 square meters to have a horizontal ground source heat pump, and so that rules most of us out. The exceptions are if you do a borehole, and that is not necessarily more expensive than a horizontal ground source heat pump, or you have a community system. And I mean, I've recently been working on a project where a communal ground source heat pump has been installed on a street which has bungalows in it, and so you've got a heat pump that supplies heat to about 20 properties through individual heat meters. So ground source heat is definitely more efficient, but it's more difficult to install in a home unless you've got a lot of land. But so that means that for most homes, then an air source heat pump is the most realistic option, and also it's cheaper. I mean, the long term costs of a ground source heat pump are more favourable, but the initial capital costs of a ground source heat pump are obviously more expensive. But because of that, the renewable heat incentive, which is still going on for domestic until March 2022, the renewable heat incentive is quite generous for air source heat pumps and even more generous for ground source heat pumps. But an air source, you know, the golden rule is in a well insulated home. In other words, if you've got your walls insulated either through the cavity or externally, and loft insulation in a reasonably well insulated home, then a heat pump, even an air source heat pump, is likely to be a viable measure. In terms of batteries, I mean, the cost of batteries is coming down. That's the cost of PV is coming down, and so in the first 6 months of this year, there has been a rise in PV installations for the first time in several years. So the sort of, you know, the trough in PV installations has come to an end, and it's started to creep up a little bit again. So the economics of PV with battery are becoming more favourable. There is I use a piece of software called Open Solar, which enables me to do an assessment of any home and whether or not it would be a good idea. I think that the bottom line is that if you've got high energy consumption, so you know, if you're using more than about 4,000 or 5,000 kilowatt hours of electricity a year in a home, and you've got high electricity consumption for whatever reason, then a battery makes sense. If you've got very low electricity consumption, you know, 2,000 kilowatt hours or less, then it's probably less likely. But it is worth doing, you know, it is worth doing the calculations, because increasingly PV with battery is a viable option. And whereas if you have a heat pump, then you simply use the heat pump as a heat store, and you use the heat. What you do with the electricity is you use it to drive the heat pump to provide your hot water the whole year round and store it in a cylinder, and that's an extremely efficient use of PV with a heat pump. And that might mean you don't even need a battery. But the other use of the other interesting thing about PV is the rise of electric vehicles. Now, as everybody knows, replacing petrol vehicles with electric vehicles is not going to solve congestion. It's not going to solve climate change on its own. People should cycle and take public transport if they can. But given that electric vehicles are happening and people need somewhere to charge them, then if you've got PV, then putting in a charger is, or not even putting in a charger, but charging your electric vehicle from the electricity from your PV is a good idea, because an electric vehicle is effectively a battery. So the economics of PV with and then store and self-consuming as much of the electricity as possible through a heat pump, electric vehicle charger, a battery, are becoming more and more favourable. And one of the things that is driving that is home working, people spending more time at home because they've got caring responsibilities, because they're working from home, and so people's daytime electricity use and even evening electricity use is increasing, and therefore PV is making more sense for a lot of people.
Phil, I've got a question for you about heat batteries. So whether you've come across heat batteries and have any kind of experience of them. I get the impression it's quite an early days technology, and looks very promising, but it sounds like there's been quite a lot of problems with early systems.
I don't have any direct experience of them, but if you would find if you would find it useful, then we'll find out and we'll get somebody on here.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I mean, they sound a good idea. The bottom line is that if you've got a well-insulated home, then a heat pump is the most efficient way you can heat your home. And the best thing you can do in terms, the big challenge that we face is decarbonising the heat supply. Yeah, because the electricity supply is decarbonising because of decreasing reliance on fossil fuels and more renewables in the grid, and dare I say it, nuclear. Although, you know, I'm not a fan of nuclear, but you know, so what the challenge we face is to decarbonize our heat supply. The first step to that is to insulate buildings. The second step towards that is to have low carbon heating systems, particularly heat pump, and that is the best thing you can do in terms of getting in terms of decarbonising the heat supply. Within that, there will be occasions where there are other forms of renewable heat and heat storage. And to be honest, I mean, a night storage heater is one of the most effective. A modern fan-assisted night storage heater with smart controls is one of the best forms of heat storage you can get. And so, you know, one of the reasons why we got into this mess is because everybody used the same fossil fuels, everybody used the same heating systems, everybody used the same sources of energy. We need to diversify the energy supply. We need to diversify the ways in which we heat our homes, and you know, heat batteries are certainly going to be part of that. But at the moment, given that we have the renewable heat incentive between now and March 2022, and given that the cost of heat pumps will slowly start to fall after 2022, then I think the key challenge for us is to get heat pumps into as many homes as are practical.
I'll definitely give you a call back. I'm thinking lots about you. Hope you're okay. We'll have a catch up soon. Bye for now.
Okay, does anybody have any more questions?
No, I think we won't go out on a better note than that. I don't think.
I think that is a great. I've really enjoyed this. Aldo, go on.
Sorry, if there is time. You mentioned a borehole. So if I understood you right, for a ground source heat pump, you need 3 times the ground area of the footprint of your building.
Yeah.
Assuming it's 2 floors. So if people got small gardens, then wouldn't everybody be getting boreholes in that place if they're so good?
A borehole is an option. I mean, the first thing is that if you're having a ground source heat pump, then you need a geological survey. And certainly if you're doing a borehole, you do a geological survey. And obviously, I suppose if everybody in Sandwell had a borehole, then that's not necessarily be a good idea. Unless it was like communal systems in social housing or in a whole street. But assuming individual ground source heat pumps, it can be done. I mean, Philip Pullman, for example, has got a ground source heat pump in his garden, but he's obviously got a big garden because he's rich and famous, and he's more famous than you, Aldo. Happy retirement, by the way, Aldo. I'm sure you've earned it. But I suspect that if you've got a big garden like Philip Pullman, then yes, you would do it. But for most of us, a ground source heat pump is probably not that realistic, and therefore, for most of us, for those of us that have got a home that is reasonably well insulated, then you would go for an air source heat pump, and there's no shame in that because insulated walls plus insulated loft plus air source heat pump, you're going to get a reduction in your carbon emissions of something like the carbon emissions from your heat supply of something like 90%, and you can't you can't ignore that. That is really fantastic. And the good thing about a heat pump is that your emissions will come down now, but they will continue to fall because the carbon content of grid electricity will be even lower in 2030 and 2035 than it is now. So by 2030, then your heat pump will be even lower in carbon. Okay, unless there are any more questions, let everybody, I think you all want to get off and have something to eat or to enjoy the last bit of the sunshine. I've really enjoyed this and found it really useful, and I hope you have too. Yeah, it's good. So I've deliberately kept this low key, and I think that's the way to do it, to make it low key. And we don't, I think we want to continue with that, but I would like to do it again. And I've got some people in mind who would come in, like John has, and Steph will be available in future to do it live. There are 1 or 2 of you in this meeting that might be future sort of guest speakers, but for now I've got a couple of people that I'm thinking of, and so I'll get to work on those, and I'll get the invites out. And in the meantime, I will send round a list of installers of insulation that operate in the sort of West Midlands area. Apologies to Nicola, it's less relevant to you. But what I do is I sort of look at is trading history, accreditations, recommendations, reputation, and so on and so forth. And the other thing I'll do is I will upload the recording of this to YouTube, put it on my website, and make sure you all get a link to it so you can watch it again, and tell other people to watch it, and they can see what they missed. So I think that's it. So thank you, everybody. Thank you in particular to John and to Steph. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and hope to speak to you all again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you.